By the time Naomi Bell stood before the judge, nobody at Waycross Grace Chapel was calling her the girl with the beautiful voice anymore. They called her something else. A fraud. A liar. A woman who had learned how to make trust sound like a prayer. Evelyn Marsh was 78 when she lost the White House her husband had painted by hand. The house where she had once laid clean towels on a narrow bed for Naomi, cooked soup when Naomi had nowhere else to go, and told her she did not have to be perfect to be loved. Walter Givens, an old veteran who wore a suit to Sunday service, lost something harder to replace than money. He lost the good name he had spent a lifetime protecting after Naomi convinced him to sign papers that made him look like part of her lie. Other elderly members of the chapel lost savings, dignity, and the quiet certainty that kindness was safe. No one died because of what Naomi did, but in that small Georgia town, people learned there are ways to ruin a life without taking it. That was what made the case so hard to forgive. Naomi had not walked into a stranger's bank account. She had walked into the softest rooms of people's loneliness. She had sat at their tables, bowed her head while they prayed, and called them family. When they handed her their faith, their signatures, and their final years of security, she turned all of it into something that could not be repaired. But before the courtroom, before the missing money, before Evelyn sat in the back row with her purse clutched like the last thing she still owned, Naomi had been a child in a white church dress, singing hymns with a voice so clear that grown people cried. They used to say God had touched that girl. Later, the children behind the church would whisper something different. Fake angel. Naomi heard that name long before she understood why shame could stick to a child for sins she had not committed. She learned early that people did not always love goodness. Sometimes they only loved the appearance of it, and that is where her tragedy began. Not because shame made her innocent, but because one day, the girl who was forced to wear a halo learned she could sharpen it into a blade. The courtroom did not look like the kind of place where a church girl's life should have ended. There were no stained glass windows, no choir robes, no hymnals tucked behind polished pews. Just fluorescent lights, a seal behind the judge, and a silence heavy enough to make every cough sound like an accusation. Naomi stood at the defense table with her hands folded in front of her. For most of her life, those hands had passed out bulletins, carried casserole dishes, touched the shoulders of grieving women, and guided trembling fingers toward the places where names were supposed to go. Now the prosecutor spoke about those same hands as if they had belonged to someone else. He did not call her broken. He did not call her wounded. He called her deliberate. He told the court Naomi Bell had known who would trust her. She had chosen people who were lonely, aging, grieving, or afraid of becoming a burden. She had not forced her way into their homes. She had been invited in. That was why the damage reached deeper than money. The people she hurt had lost the part of themselves that believed kindness could be safe. Naomi kept her eyes low. She could feel Evelyn Marsh behind her without turning around. The old woman sat 2 rows back, dressed in the same pale blue cardigan she used to wear on Wednesday nights at church. Evelyn had not come to make a scene. That was never her way. She sat with her purse in her lap, as if holding down the last small piece of a life Naomi had not managed to take. Walter Givens sat farther away. Years before, Walter had trusted her because she reminded him of a daughter he had buried too young. He had signed because Naomi asked softly. He had believed because belief was what decent people did before someone taught them to regret it. Now he stared at the floor. That hurt Naomi more than anger would have. Walter's silence told her he had already finished speaking to her in his heart. When the judge asked whether Naomi understood the charges, she answered yes. Her voice was quieter than the room expected. Some people had come hoping to hear the old sweetness in it, as if the sound might explain how they had been fooled. But a voice is not a soul. A beautiful voice can carry a lie just as easily as a hymn, and Naomi knew that better than anyone. Because long before the court called her a fraud, Waycross Grace Chapel had called her something else. Gifted, blessed, special. As a child, Naomi had learned the sanctuary from the floor up. She knew the scuffed boards near the altar, the groan of the third pew on the left, the smell of old hymnals and lemon polish. She knew which women carried peppermints in their purses and which men pretended not to cry when she sang Amazing Grace. On Sunday mornings, Clara Bell dressed her daughter carefully, brushed hair, a ribbon tied so tightly it made Naomi's scalp ache. Clara would smooth the front of her dress like a woman preparing evidence. "Stand straight," Clara would whisper. "Smile like you mean it." Naomi did. She smiled when her stomach hurt. She smiled when the lights felt too hot. She smiled when grown people touched her cheek and told Clara she was raising an angel. Naomi did not know yet that adults sometimes praise children because it made the adults feel better about what they had failed to see. At home, the bills hid in drawers. The phone rang, and Clara let it ring. Some nights, Naomi heard her mother crying in the bathroom with the fan running. Other nights, Clara walked through the house in her church shoes, rehearsing explanations under her breath. But on Sunday, Clara became soft-spoken again. Naomi became clean and shining. Together, they looked like proof that everything inside their house was still in order. That was Naomi's first lesson. Truth did not have to be true. It only had to be convincing enough for people who wanted to believe it. Years later in the courtroom, people would ask when Naomi became dangerous. The answer was not simple. It began much earlier, in that Georgia church, where a little girl learned that goodness could be performed, shame could be inherited, and love could disappear the moment the performance failed. In Waycross, Georgia, a girl could grow up believing the church knew everything about her before she knew herself. Naomi Bell learned that early. Waycross Grace Chapel sat near the edge of a two-lane road, with a gravel lot on one side and pine trees on the other. In a town that small, people already knew who owed money, who smiled too hard, and whose house had gone wrong behind closed curtains. Naomi only knew that church was where her mother became beautiful. At home, Clara Bell was sharp around the edges. She moved through the kitchen with unopened envelopes near the bread box and a look that told Naomi not to ask questions. Clara could be tender in sudden ways. She could brush Naomi's hair with careful fingers, hum old gospel songs, and kiss the top of her daughter's head as if apologizing for something she had not yet said out loud. But tenderness never lasted long in that house. A phone call could change the air. A bill with red letters could send Clara into a silence Naomi knew better than words. Then Sunday came. On Sunday, Clara powdered her face, pinned her hair, and pulled Naomi into a clean dress. She spoke softer in the car. She smiled before anyone greeted them. She called older women ma'am and laughed gently when men at the church steps said Naomi was getting prettier every week. Naomi watched the transformation like a child watching a magic trick. Her mother did not become a different person exactly. She became a version of herself the world was willing to forgive. And Naomi learned to do the same. She learned which smile made adults relax. She learned to lower her eyes when women praised her manners. She learned to say, "Yes, ma'am," before anyone could decide she was rude. Most of all, she learned that her voice could change the way people looked at her. When Naomi sang, the room softened. Old women closed their eyes. Men who rarely spoke wiped their faces with the backs of their hands. Even Clara looked proud in those moments, not frightened, not angry, not cornered by the life waiting at home. Naomi began to crave that look. It was not quite love, but it was close enough for a child who did not know the difference. People told Clara she had raised an angel. Clara accepted the compliment like a woman accepting proof. "She's my good girl," she would say, resting a hand on Naomi's shoulder. Naomi tried to be exactly that. She tried not to complain, tried not to ask why the lights sometimes went out, tried not to mention the men who came by asking for money Clara said she did not owe. Being good, Naomi believed, meant helping her mother look good. That belief became part of her before she had language for it. Then came the envelope. Naomi was 11 when the trouble at the church started. She did not know the full shape of it. Children rarely do. She heard pieces. Fundraiser money, missing receipts, a benevolence fund, Clara's name said in low voices near the fellowship hall. She saw women stop talking when she approached. She saw Reverend Pike place a hand on Clara's shoulder with the heavy kindness adults used when kindness was already mixed with disappointment. At home, Clara said people were jealous. She said church folks loved a sinner until the sinner sat too close to them. She said nobody remembered all the time she had helped set up tables and brought food to funerals. They only remembered numbers on paper. Naomi wanted to believe her. One Wednesday evening, Clara dressed Naomi in her white church dress, even though there was no service for children that night. The dress had a lace collar that scratched her neck. "Just stand beside me," Clara said in the car. "Don't make that face." "What face?" "The face that makes people think something is wrong." Inside the chapel, the air felt different. No one was singing. No one was laughing over coffee. A small group of adults sat scattered through the front pews, and Naomi understood she had been brought into a room where something had already been decided. Clara stood near the altar and spoke first. Her voice trembled in all the right places. She said she had made mistakes. She said she had been under pressure. She said she never meant to hurt the church. Then her hand found Naomi's shoulder and pulled her closer. Naomi looked up. For one foolish second, she thought her mother was reaching for comfort. Instead, Clara said, "We're sorry for the shame this has brought." That word entered Naomi like a stain. She had not touched the envelopes. She had not counted the money. She had not signed anything, hidden anything, taken anything. She was 11 years old. Her world was school, hymns, soup cans, unpaid bills, and the desperate hope that her mother would be gentle when they got home. But the room heard and after that, Naomi could feel their eyes include her. No one meant to be cruel. That almost made it worse. Some faces were sad. Some were embarrassed. A few looked away because looking at a child in the middle of adult shame made them uncomfortable. But discomfort did not save Naomi. Pity did not separate her from Clara. Silence did not tell the truth. She stood there and learned something the adults never meant to teach. In a room full of believers, innocence still needed someone brave enough to name it. No one did. After the meeting, Clara cried in the car. Not for Naomi. Not exactly. She cried because people had judged her, because the church had turned cold, because she would never again walk into that sanctuary without wondering who remembered. Naomi sat beside her, the lace collar scratching her skin, and felt a strange distance open inside her. The next Sunday, Naomi sang again. That was what people remembered most. How steady her voice sounded, how mature she seemed for her age. They did not understand that steadiness was not peace. It was obedience. It was fear, polished into something pretty. Behind the church, near the patch of dirt where children waited for their parents, two girls from Naomi's Sunday school whispered loud enough for her to hear. "Fake angel." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Naomi kept walking. Only when she reached the side of the building did she stop. She pressed her back against the warm brick and tried to breathe. The insult hurt because it was unfair, but it also hurt because some small part of her feared it might become true. If people already thought she was pretending, why keep trying to be real? If goodness could be doubted, maybe appearance was all that mattered. That afternoon, Clara told her not to worry about jealous little girls. But Naomi was not thinking about jealousy. She was thinking about the room, about the word we, about the way adults could look at a child and see the shadow of a parent's sin, about how quickly praise could turn into suspicion. Something inside Naomi did not break all at once. It adjusted. She became more careful. Sweeter when watched, quieter when questioned. She learned to listen for what people wanted before they asked. She learned that truth, by itself, did not protect anyone. Truth could stand in the middle of a chapel in a white dress and still be ignored. So Naomi began to build another kind of safety. Not honesty, control. If people were going to see a halo anyway, she would decide how bright it looked. After the church meeting, Clara Bell did not become smaller. She became louder where no one from Waycross Grace Chapel could hear her. At church, she still carried covered dishes into the fellowship hall. She still kissed older women on the cheek and said she was praying through a difficult season. But at home, every kindness came with an edge. She blamed the women who whispered. She blamed Reverend Pike. She blamed the treasurer. And when Clara ran out of adults to blame, her eyes sometimes landed on Naomi. "You look scared up there," she said one night, standing over a sink full of dishes. Naomi held a wet plate in both hands. "I was scared." Clara turned toward her. "You cannot look scared when people already want to think the worst of us." Oos. There it was again. That little word with a hook inside it. When Clara said us, she usually meant Naomi had to help carry something Clara could not bear to carry alone. A bill, a lie, a smile, a shame that had not belonged to Naomi until her mother placed it in her hands. The house changed after that. Not in a dramatic way. No windows broke. No police came. There was food most nights, even if it came from cans. There were clean clothes if Naomi washed them herself. But home began to feel less like shelter and more like a waiting room, where both of them sat quietly, expecting bad news. The phone rang often. Clara let it ring. Naomi learned the sounds of trouble. A short knock meant a neighbor. A heavy knock meant someone collecting money. The mailbox closing too hard meant another envelope with red letters. Clara opening a drawer and shutting it fast meant Naomi should not ask, so she stopped asking. At school, Naomi became careful. If she said too little, teachers worried. If she said too much, they listened too closely. So she gave them just enough. Yes, ma'am. I'm fine. Mama's fine. Church is fine. Fine became one of her first real lies. It was not a cruel lie. Not yet. It was a small, polished stone she carried in her mouth, because the truth was too large for a child to explain. How could she tell a teacher that her mother loved her and used her? That Clara could kiss her forehead in the morning and make her feel guilty by nightfall? That the church had not abandoned them but had changed its eyes? Naomi only knew that people liked her better when her pain did not make them uncomfortable. So she became easy to praise. She sang when asked. She helped stack chairs. She smiled at women who looked at Clara too long. She let elderly members hug her after service, even when their pity pressed into her shoulders. She is handling it so well, they said. Naomi learned to hate that sentence. Handling it well meant she was quiet enough, pretty enough, spiritual enough. It meant her suffering had stayed neat, and adults did not have to step around it. Clara loved when people said it. She is stronger than folks know, Clara would answer, squeezing Naomi's arm. But the squeeze was never only affection. It was instruction. Be strong where they can see you. Do not embarrass me. Do not make this worse. Over time, Clara's fear hardened into belief. She told Naomi church people were not really good. They were only comfortable. They loved sinners in sermons and judged them in grocery aisles. Naomi did not want to believe that. There were still people who were kind. Mrs. Donnelly slipped extra biscuits onto Naomi's plate at potlucks. Walter Givens always asked about school and waited for the answer. Evelyn Marsh, who sat near the front with silver hair pinned low, once touched Naomi's hand and said, "You are not what people whisper, sweetheart." Naomi wanted to keep that sentence. But Clara's voice was louder because Clara's voice lived at home. By 14, Naomi had learned how to divide herself. There was the Naomi who sang, the Naomi who helped, the Naomi who kept secrets, the Naomi who hated pity, the Naomi who still wanted the same people to love her. None of those versions felt completely false. That was the dangerous part. A lie told often enough does not always feel like a mask. Sometimes it begins to feel like a room you built because no other room was safe. Then Clara began leaving more often. At first, it was for work. Then errands. Then a few hours that stretched until midnight. Naomi would sit at the kitchen table with homework open in front of her, listening for tires on gravel. When Clara came home, she smelled like cigarette smoke and perfume from someone else's car. "Do not look at me like that," Clara said one night. Naomi looked down. She had not known her face was doing anything. After that, she practiced expressions in the bathroom mirror. Not because she was vain, because her face had become dangerous. Too much fear made Clara angry. Too much sadness made adults ask questions. Too much anger made people remember whose daughter she was. So Naomi practiced calm. She practiced gentle. She practiced the soft, wounded smile that made people want to forgive her before she had done anything wrong. Years later, that smile would ruin people. But at 14, it was only armor. The final collapse of home came on a Tuesday morning. There had been no argument the night before. Clara made grilled cheese for dinner, burned one side, scraped it with a knife, and laughed like the sound cost her something. She told Naomi to keep doing well in school. She said Evelyn Marsh had a good heart. She said sometimes women had to leave a place before it swallowed them. Naomi asked what that meant. Clara told her not to be dramatic. The next morning, Clara was gone. Not dead. Not officially missing. Just gone in the way selfish adults sometimes disappear, leaving enough uncertainty behind to make the child feel guilty for calling it abandonment. 2 drawers were open in Clara's room. Her good shoes were missing. So was the little box where she kept cash and folded papers Naomi had never been allowed to touch. On the kitchen table sat a note. I will come back when I get things straight. No apology. No address. No promise Naomi could trust. For a long time, Naomi stood beside the table and stared at those words. She did not cry right away. Crying would have meant she understood. Instead, she folded the note once, then again, until it became a small, hard square in her palm. By noon, the house felt less like a home than a stage after the actors had left. Clara had taken the main part and left Naomi with the props. The unpaid bills, the church shame, the last name, the face people would search for resemblance in. The old word us, now emptied of even the person who had used it. That was the day Naomi learned another lesson. People did not only leave when they stopped loving you. Sometimes they left after using your goodness to make themselves look redeemable. And if that was love, Naomi wanted to be the one holding the door next time. Evelyn Marsh did not save Naomi with a speech. She saved her with a room. It was the back bedroom of a small white house at the end of Pecan Street. The walls were pale yellow. On the bed, Evelyn had folded 2 towels so clean they looked almost ceremonial. Naomi stood in the doorway with a garbage bag of clothes at her feet. She was 14 years old, trying not to look like a child who had been left. Evelyn did not ask her to explain Clara. She did not ask whether the rumors were true or whether Naomi knew where her mother had gone. She simply touched the bedspread and said, "You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow can be handled tomorrow." That sentence unsettled Naomi more than questions would have. In Clara's house, tomorrow had always been a threat. Tomorrow was when the bill came due, when the lie had to be repeated, when someone found out what had been hidden. But in Evelyn's mouth, tomorrow sounded like something a person could survive. At first, Naomi did not know how to live inside kindness that did not demand a performance. She woke before dawn and made the bed too neatly. She washed dishes before Evelyn could reach the sink. She offered to sing whenever anyone asked, because singing was the only rent she understood how to pay. Evelyn noticed. One evening, she found Naomi wiping a counter that was already clean. "Child," Evelyn said gently, "you do not have to earn every hour you sleep here." Naomi smiled because smiling was easier than believing her. Evelyn did not push. She let Naomi sit in the kitchen while soup warmed on the stove. She taught her which bills had to be paid first and why a receipt mattered. She showed her how to stretch a pot of beans through 3 meals without making poverty feel like punishment. Slowly, Naomi began to breathe. There were evenings when she almost felt normal. She sat across from Evelyn, listening to the old woman talk about her late husband, Samuel, who had painted the house every spring. Evelyn spoke of him plainly, without turning grief into a performance. Naomi did not know people could be sad that way. Without decoration, without using it. For a while, the Marsh house became the closest thing Naomi had ever known to safety. At church, people softened toward her because Evelyn had taken her in. Walter Givens drove her to youth choir practice. The town did not forget Clara, but Evelyn's quiet approval made it harder for them to treat Naomi like Clara's shadow. That should have been enough. For a little while, Naomi tried to let it be. Then Clara called. The number was unfamiliar. Evelyn was outside hanging laundry, and Naomi picked up because she thought it might be the school. Her mother's voice entered the kitchen like smoke under a door. "Baby," Clara said, already crying. "I just need you to listen." Clara said she was in trouble but would not say where. She said people had lied about her, used her, trapped her. Then she asked for money. "Not much," she promised. "Just enough to get settled." Naomi looked toward the window. Evelyn stood in the yard, pinning a white sheet to the line. The sight should have steadied Naomi. Instead, guilt rose fast and hot inside her. Clara was still her mother. That was the chain Naomi had never learned how to remove. She told Clara she did not have money. Clara went quiet in the wounded way Naomi knew too well. Then came the softest knife. "I guess you found yourself a better family." Naomi closed her eyes. That night, she barely slept. She thought about Evelyn's purse by the back door and the envelope in the kitchen drawer where Evelyn kept cash for groceries and church donations. She told herself she would only borrow it. She would replace it before Evelyn knew. She would help Clara once, and then everything would go back to the way it had been. The next morning, while Evelyn was in the garden, Naomi opened the drawer. Her hand shook as she took the money, not because she did not know it was wrong, because she did. That mattered. Naomi was not confused. She knew Evelyn trusted her. She knew the money was not hers. She knew there were other choices, humiliating choices, like telling Evelyn the truth and asking for help. But truth had never protected Naomi before. So she chose the lie that gave her control. For 2 days, nothing happened. That almost made it worse. Naomi waited for Evelyn to notice. She offered to cook. She sang louder at church. She became sweeter, more careful. The old reflex returned. If the outside looked good enough, maybe the inside would stay hidden. Evelyn noticed on the 3rd day. She did not shout. She stood at the kitchen drawer with the envelope in her hand, and her face changed in a way Naomi had no defense for. Not rage, not disgust. It was sorrow. "Naomi," Evelyn said. "Did your mama call?" The question broke something open. Naomi cried then. She told part of the truth, not all of it. She said Clara needed help. She said she meant to put the money back. She said she did not know what else to do. Evelyn listened. Then she sat down across from Naomi and took her hand. "You could have told me," she said. Naomi nodded, but inside, she heard something different. "You were caught." Evelyn forgave her. She made Naomi call Clara and say there would be no more money. She made Naomi work off what she had taken. She kept her in the house. It should have taught Naomi that love could survive the truth. Instead, Naomi learned the wrong lesson. She learned that if someone loved you enough, they might stay after you lied. She learned that sorrow could be endured if it did not come with abandonment. She learned that forgiveness could feel dangerously close to permission. Years later, people would imagine Naomi's betrayal of Evelyn as sudden cruelty. But the first betrayal had been small. A hand in a drawer, a promise to fix it later, a lie wrapped around the word mother. And Evelyn, with all her mercy, had mistaken Naomi's tears for repentance when they were only the beginning of a more careful kind of hiding. By the time Naomi Bell turned 22, Waycross Grace Chapel had learned how to forgive her in public. No one said Clara Bell's name often anymore, but Naomi could still feel it in certain pauses. When she entered the fellowship hall, conversation softened for half a second. Naomi noticed. She always noticed. But now she had Evelyn Marsh beside her, and Evelyn's quiet approval carried weight. If Evelyn trusted the girl, most people decided they could trust her too. Naomi had finished high school. She had taken bookkeeping classes at the community college 2 towns over, not because numbers interested her, but because numbers looked clean when arranged correctly. They did not gossip. They did not remember your mother. They only said what the paper made them say. The chapel needed help with its outreach office. The church had a small benevolence fund, a pantry program, and elderly members who needed rides, forms, phone calls, or help understanding official letters. Naomi fit there easily, too easily. She knew how to sound patient on the phone. She knew how to sit at a kitchen table and make an older person feel less embarrassed about needing help. She could read the fear in a widow's face before the widow admitted she did not understand a bill. She could make forms seem less cold by placing a hand over the paper and saying, "We will take this one line at a time." People trusted her because she seemed to understand shame without judging it. And that part was not fake. Naomi did understand shame. She understood the heat of it in the face, the smallness in the chest, the way it could make a person sign anything if the person beside them sounded kind enough. At first, she used that understanding gently. She helped Martha Ellis call about a medical bill. She drove Walter Givens to an appointment after his truck battery died. She sorted church receipts with Evelyn on Saturdays. For a while, it looked like Grace had done what people said Grace could do. Evelyn believed it. Walter believed it. Naomi tried to believe it too. Then Caleb called. Caleb Bell was Naomi's half-brother, though half never felt like the right word. He had Clara's restless voice and Clara's talent for arriving only when need had already become emergency. He was younger, moved between relatives, and carried the Bell name like a debt someone else had opened in his account. He said he was in trouble. He always said it quietly at first. This time, he needed money for rent, then for a car repair, then for a fee he claimed would keep him out of something worse. Naomi asked questions, and Caleb turned wounded. "You sound just like them," he said. "Them who?" "The people who think Bells are born guilty." Naomi hated him for saying it because it worked. She sent him money from her own account first. Then she skipped meals and delayed paying her phone bill. Then she borrowed from Evelyn and promised to repay it. Evelyn helped once, then twice. But the third time she looked at Naomi with a sadness that felt too much like memory. "Your mama used to make everything sound like the last emergency," Evelyn said. Naomi pulled her hand away. Caleb was not Clara, she told herself. This was family. This was loyalty. This was proof she had not become one of those church people who gave mercy only when it looked respectable. The first time Naomi used church money, it was almost nothing. A small amount from the outreach cash box, taken after she had stayed late filing receipts. She wrote herself a note in her head. Put it back Friday. Friday came. Caleb needed more. A woman from the pantry needed groceries. Evelyn needed help calling the tax office. Walter stopped by with coffee and thanked Naomi for being the kind of young person who gave him hope for the church. Naomi smiled. The money did not go back. Instead, she adjusted the order of things. A reimbursement that could wait. A receipt that could be filed later. A donation that had not yet been counted. She did not think of it as stealing. Not at first. She thought of it as moving trouble from one hand to another until she had time to fix it. That was the lie that made the next lie easier. Around that time, people began calling Naomi a blessing again. This praise was quieter than childhood praise, more practical. Naomi was the one who could calm Martha down. Naomi was the one Walter trusted with confusing letters. Naomi was the one Evelyn said had come so far, proof that grace works. That phrase followed Naomi through the halls like perfume. She loved it. She feared it. Every time someone said it, the space between who she seemed to be and what she was hiding grew wider. Still, there was power in being needed. Naomi had spent her childhood as a warning attached to Clara's name. Now, old women pressed keys into her palm. Men who once lowered their voices around her mother now asked Naomi where to sign. People who had pitied her now waited for her to tell them what to do. She told herself she was helping. Most days, she was. That was what made the corruption harder to see. Naomi did not wake up one morning and decide to become cruel. She brought casseroles. She made phone calls. She sat beside hospital beds. And between those good deeds, she learned how much trust could cover. One evening, Evelyn found Naomi at the kitchen table with church folders spread in front of her. "You look tired," Evelyn said. Naomi covered one paper with another. "I'm fine." The old lie returned so easily it almost sounded true. Evelyn studied her. Fine is not always honest. Naomi laughed softly, but her throat tightened. She could have told Evelyn then. She could have said Caleb was pulling her under. She could have said she had borrowed from places she should not have touched. She could have let Evelyn be disappointed while there was still time for disappointment to save someone. Instead, Naomi gathered the papers into a neat stack. "I just want to do this right," she said. Evelyn believed her because Evelyn wanted to. And Naomi let herself be believed because being believed felt better than being clean. That was the first door back into the community. It opened wide, with hymns and outreach forms and old hands reaching for hers. Naomi stepped through it, looking like redemption. But she did not build her new life on truth. She built it on the hope that if enough people needed her, no one would look too closely at what she had begun to take. The first time Naomi heard them say her mother's name again, she was standing outside the fellowship hall with a tray of coffee cups in her hands. She had not meant to listen. That was what she told herself later. Inside the room, 3 women from the chapel finance committee were sorting decorations for a fall fundraiser. Their voices were low, but old buildings carried sound through vents and cracked doors. "I am not saying the girl has done anything," one woman said. Another answered. No one said Clara had done anything either. Not at first. Naomi stopped moving. The tray grew heavy. A third woman sighed. "Blood tells. That is all I am saying. You can dress it up, put it in the choir, give it office keys. But some families carry trouble like a birthmark." The words did not strike Naomi like a new wound. They opened an old one perfectly. For weeks, maybe months, she had believed she was becoming someone else in their eyes. She had answered calls, delivered groceries, filed receipts, prayed with widows, sat beside hospital beds, and smiled until her face ached. She had become useful, necessary, almost beloved. And still, behind a half-closed door, she was Clara Bell's daughter again. Not Naomi. Not the young woman Evelyn trusted. Not the one Walter praised for her patience. A Bell. A warning with a hymn book. Naomi stepped back before the cups could rattle. She carried the tray to the kitchen, set it down, and stood over the sink with both hands pressed against the counter. She did not cry. Crying would have admitted they had touched something alive. Instead, something inside her went quiet. That quiet frightened her less than it should have. For the rest of the afternoon, Naomi served coffee with the same soft smile. She asked Mrs. Donnelly about her hip. She helped Martha Ellis find her sweater. She thanked the finance women for staying late. None of them knew she had heard. That gave Naomi a strange feeling. Not pain exactly, position. For the first time, she understood that people were not only watching her, she could watch them back. She began to notice what each person needed to believe. Mrs. Donnelly needed to believe she was still generous, not lonely. Martha Ellis needed to believe someone would miss her if she stopped coming to church. Walter Givens needed to believe the world still produced young people worthy of trust. Evelyn needed to believe Naomi was proof that love could repair what shame had damaged. And the finance women needed to believe their suspicion was wisdom, not cruelty. Naomi saw all of it. Once she saw it, she could not stop seeing it. That was the twist that pushed her deeper. It was not simply that the church still judged her. It was that their judgment gave her permission, in her own mind, to judge them back. If they were going to pretend mercy while preserving suspicion, why should Naomi be the only one required to be honest? The thought was ugly. It also felt fair. Reverend Thomas Hale noticed the change before anyone else did. He was newer to Waycross Grace Chapel, young enough to still believe a church could be healed by telling the truth gently. Unlike Reverend Pike, he had not known Clara's scandal from the beginning. He watched people without inheriting all their old loyalties. One Thursday morning, he found Naomi alone in the outreach office, entering donation records. "You have been carrying a lot," he said. Naomi smiled without looking up. "That is what the office is for. I mean you." Her fingers paused over the keyboard. Reverend Hale stood in the doorway, not accusing, not soft enough to be fooled either. Sometimes people mistake being needed for being well. Naomi felt heat rise beneath her collar. "I am fine." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that exact answer. Fine can become a hiding place. The words were too close to Evelyn's. For 1 second, Naomi felt cornered by goodness. That was how twisted her heart had become. Suspicion made her angry, but kindness made her panic. She closed the ledger. "Did someone say something to you?" "No." "Then why are we having this conversation?" "Because you look exhausted," he said, "and because too many people are asking only you to help with things they should not be asking one person to handle alone." Naomi heard the warning under the concern. Keys, forms, checks, signatures, rides, private questions asked at kitchen tables. He was not accusing her yet, but he was placing a hand near the curtain. Naomi could feel it. "I am just trying to serve," she said. "I believe that," Reverend Hale answered. "But service without accountability can hurt people, even when the person serving means well." "Means well." Naomi almost laughed. People always found the gentlest way to say they did not trust her. After he left, Naomi sat alone in the office. The old fear came first. They were watching, they were waiting, they would say they had known all along. Then came anger, cleaner and easier to hold. She thought of the finance women. Blood tells. She thought of Clara crying in cars, of the word we, of the white dress, of children whispering behind the church. Then she opened the file cabinet. Not to steal. Not that day. Only to look. That was how she described it to herself. She looked at who depended on the church for help, who had savings, who was behind on property taxes, who trusted her with mail because their children lived far away. She looked at the delicate map of need inside Waycross Grace Chapel. Need had always made Naomi vulnerable. Now, for the first time, it made other people readable. That was the moment her understanding of shame changed. Before, shame had been something people used against her. Now she saw it as a door. If she stood on the right side of it, spoke softly enough, and offered relief at the right time, people would open more than their hearts. They would open drawers, purses, files, lives. Naomi knew the thought was wrong. She knew it so clearly that she pushed the drawer shut and stepped away, breathing hard. For a moment, she almost called Evelyn. She almost said, "Something is happening to me. and I do not like who I am when no one is watching. But confession required a kind of trust Naomi had spent years dismantling inside herself. So she did what she had learned to do. She made the outside beautiful. That Sunday, Naomi sang in the chapel again. Her voice rose clean and trembling through the sanctuary. People closed their eyes. Evelyn wept quietly. Walter bowed his head. The finance women smiled as if they had never said a word. Naomi looked out at them and felt something settle into place. If they loved the appearance of goodness, she would give them an appearance so convincing they would hand her anything. And if they later called her false, Naomi would tell herself they had written that ending long before she chose to live inside it. Naomi Bell did not begin by thinking of herself as someone who preyed on old people. That would have been too ugly to survive. She began with softer words. Help, borrow, fix, lauder. Those words were small enough to fit inside a prayer. By then, the outreach office had become a second sanctuary. People came there carrying envelopes, medical bills, shut-off notices, and the quiet embarrassment of not understanding what the world had mailed them. Naomi sat behind the desk with a pen in her hand and patience in her voice. She was good at it. That was part of the danger. When Martha Ellis came in with a stack of papers she had been too ashamed to show her children, Naomi did not make her feel foolish. She pulled a chair close, lowered her voice, and said, "You are not the first person to need help with this." Martha's eyes filled with relief. Naomi meant the kindness in that moment. Then she noticed how relief made Martha compliant. That was the line Naomi crossed without moving her feet. She began to understand that trust had a rhythm. First came embarrassment, then gratitude, then dependence. If Naomi entered at the right moment, with the right softness, people did not feel managed. They felt rescued. Walter Givens trusted her differently. He was proud of needing little. A retired veteran with polished shoes and a calendar full of appointments he refused to miss, Walter did not like admitting confusion. But he had bad knees, fading eyesight, and a daughter-shaped loneliness he rarely named. Naomi never rushed him. She let him tell stories. She remembered his wife's birthday. She brewed coffee too weak because that was how he liked it. When he handed her a letter and asked what it meant, she treated the question like an honor instead of a burden. Walter began saying, "Naomi knows about these things." People listened. Evelyn noticed the influence growing and tried to see it as healing. Her girl had become useful, loved, needed. Naomi tried to see it that way too, but beneath the good deeds, the money problem widened. Caleb kept calling. The outreach cash she had borrowed did not return. Small delays became adjusted records. Adjusted records became explanations waiting to be needed. Naomi was not creating a grand scheme. She was building a hallway of locked doors, one small room at a time, and telling herself she would open them before anyone noticed. Then came the first signature. An elderly member needed help arranging a payment plan. A form required a witness. Walter happened to be there. Naomi explained it quickly, gently, in the language of church service and practical mercy. Walter signed because he trusted her. Nothing terrible happened that day. That was what made it easier the next time. Naomi learned that a signature could feel harmless when surrounded by familiar things. A kitchen table, a cup of coffee, a Bible near the lamp, her own soft voice saying, "This just lets us help faster." She was careful not to think too long about the word us. Us had once been the hook Clara used to pull Naomi into shame. Now Naomi used it to pull others into trust. The first time that realization came to her, she felt sick. She was sitting in her car outside Martha Ellis's house, watching rain gather on the windshield. In her purse was an envelope Martha had given her willingly. Naomi had said it would help sort things out. Martha had believed her. Naomi gripped the steering wheel and whispered, "I am not my mother." But the words did not settle. So she added another sentence, "I am going to fix it." That one felt better, because it allowed her to keep driving. The taste of power did not arrive like joy. It arrived like relief. Naomi had spent her life being the girl other people interpreted. Clara's daughter. The fake angel. The redeemed charity case. The proof that grace worked. Now she could enter a room and decide what people understood. If an old woman was afraid, Naomi could calm her. If a donor asked questions, Naomi could soften the answer. If Walter hesitated, Naomi could look wounded just long enough for him to feel guilty for doubting her. That last part frightened her. It also worked. Reverend Hale continued to press for shared oversight in the outreach office. He suggested 2 volunteers for financial help and clearer records, framing every request as protection for Naomi as much as for the church. Naomi smiled and agreed. Then she delayed. A file was at home. A receipt was in another folder. Martha was embarrassed and wanted privacy. Walter had already reviewed that one. Evelyn could confirm the rest. Every explanation contained just enough truth to survive. That was Naomi's gift, not pure invention. Arrangement. She knew how to place facts in an order that made the lie look like mercy. One afternoon, Walter came by while Naomi was closing the office. He held his hat in both hands. "Reverend Hale asked me about some forms," he said. "Said my name was on more than I remembered." Naomi felt the room narrow. For 1 second, she could have stopped. She could have sat Walter down. She could have told him the truth before his good name became tangled in her fear. He might have gone to Evelyn. He might never have trusted her again. But he would have been safe. Instead, Naomi let her eyes fill. "Did he make it sound like I did something wrong?" Walter straightened immediately. "No, honey. I did not mean I am trying so hard," she said. Her voice trembled in the exact place she knew it should. "Sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, people are waiting for me to turn into Clara." Walter's face changed. There it was. The opening. Naomi saw it and hated herself for seeing it. Then she stepped through. "You signed because you believed in the work," she said. "And because you believed in me, I would never put you in a bad position." Walter looked ashamed for having worried. He apologized. Naomi accepted. After he left, she locked the office door and pressed her forehead against the cool wood. Her stomach twisted. She had not only lied to Walter, she had used his kindness to make him feel guilty for nearing the truth. That was different. That was worse. She knew it. For a few minutes, regret came so sharply she could barely breathe. She imagined walking to Evelyn's house, putting every folder on the table, and saying, "I have done something terrible, but maybe it is not too late." Then Caleb called again. Then the church phone rang. Then Martha left a message thanking Naomi for being the only person who never made her feel stupid. By evening, regret had become another thing Naomi promised to deal with later. That was how her fall deepened. Not in one leap, but through moments she survived by postponing the truth. She still brought casseroles, prayed beside hospital beds, and sang when asked. And every good thing she did made the bad thing harder to confess, because Naomi had built a life where her usefulness stood between her and judgment. The people of Waycross Grace Chapel believed they were watching a wounded girl become a woman of service. Naomi let them believe it, but behind the soft voice, behind the careful records and lowered eyes, she was learning a terrible lesson. Trust was not only something a person could lose. In the right hands, it was something a person could spend. Reverend Thomas Hale did not call Naomi into his office with anger. That was what made it dangerous. Anger would have given Naomi something to fight. Accusation would have let her become the wounded girl again, the one people had always expected to fail. But Reverend Hale spoke gently, with the door half open and 2 cups of untouched coffee on his desk. "Naomi," he said, "I need you to sit down." The office looked ordinary. A bookshelf, a framed photo of the chapel in spring, a legal pad with his handwriting on it. Nothing about the room said judgment, but Naomi felt judgment anyway. She sat. Reverend Hale folded his hands. "I have been reviewing the outreach records." Naomi looked at the coffee instead of his face. "There are things I cannot make sense of," he continued. "Not one thing. A pattern. Delayed deposits. Missing explanations. Members whose names appear in places they do not fully understand." He did not say Walter first. That mercy almost undid her. Naomi felt the room tilt toward confession. For one strange second, she wanted to lay everything down. Caleb, the borrowed money, the adjusted records, Martha's envelope, Walter's confused signature. The look on Evelyn's face, if she ever knew. The truth rose in her throat. Then another memory rose faster. White dress, lace collar. "We are sorry for the shame this has brought." She saw the sanctuary again, adults looking at her through Clara's sin. She heard the girls behind the church. Fake angel. If she confessed, they would say they had known. Walter would stop seeing his lost daughter in her. Evelyn would understand that all her mercy had not saved anyone. Naomi gripped the edge of the chair. Reverend Hale leaned forward. "If something has gone wrong," he said, "there may still be a way to repair part of it. But it has to begin with the truth." Truth. Naomi almost laughed. People spoke about truth as if it were a clean river. In Naomi's life, truth had always arrived muddy, carrying shame that belonged to someone else. Truth had not separated her from Clara. Truth had not stopped the whispers. Truth had not kept her mother from leaving. And now, truth wanted payment. "I have tried to do everything right," Naomi said. Her voice was small. Reverend Hale did not soften too much. "I believe you have done many right things. That is not the same as everything being right." The sentence struck deeper than accusation, because it was fair. Naomi hated him for being fair. He slid a folder across the desk. She saw enough. Dates, names, initials. Walter Givens near the top. "Did Walter review these with you?" he asked. There it was. The doorway. Naomi stared at Walter's name. She imagined the old man standing outside the chapel in his Sunday suit, holding his hat and asking if he had misunderstood something. She imagined his shame if the church questioned him. She could still stop. She could say Walter had trusted her. She could say he had not understood. She could say the responsibility was hers. Instead, Naomi lowered her eyes. "Walter wanted to help," she said. Reverend Hale went still. "What does that mean?" Naomi did not lie in one large piece. She arranged the truth until it pointed away from her. Walter had signed some papers. Walter cared deeply about the outreach work. Walter sometimes insisted on helping even when the process was confusing. Walter was proud, and she had not wanted to embarrass him by asking too many questions. Each sentence contained something real. Together, they made something false. Reverend Hale listened without interrupting. That made Naomi keep talking. Silence was a space she rushed to fill because silence was where guilt grew teeth. "I am not saying he did anything wrong," she added quickly. "I would never say that. I just think he may have misunderstood what he was approving." There. Not en accusation. A shadow was enough. For the first time in months, Naomi felt the immediate danger move away from her body and settle near someone else. Relief came so fast it made her dizzy. Then came disgust. She could feel both at once. Reverend Hale closed the folder. "I am going to speak with Walter," he said. Naomi nodded, as if that were reasonable. "Naomi," he said, and his voice changed. "This is the moment to be careful with another person's name." She looked up. For a second, she thought he knew everything. Not the records, not the money. Her. He knew she was standing beside a door she could still choose not to open. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "I would never hurt Walter," she whispered. The terrible thing was that part of her meant it. Reverend Hale dismissed her without comfort. Outside, the hallway smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper. Naomi walked past the choir room, past the bulletin board with smiling photos from fundraisers, past the framed verse about truth setting people free. At the end of the hall, she stopped. Her phone was in her purse. She could call Evelyn. She could go back into the office. She could tell Reverend Hale that fear had just spoken for her, that Walter should not be dragged into a mess she had made. It would be humiliating. It would be costly. It would probably end everything she had built. But it might still save Walter. Naomi stood there long enough for that possibility to become real. Then she kept walking. That was the choice. Not the first lie. Not the first stolen dollar. Not the first adjusted record. Those had been wrong, but she had buried them under panic and family and survival. This was different. This was Naomi seeing an innocent man near the edge of her consequences and choosing not to pull him back. By evening, Walter had already received a call from Reverend Hale. By morning, people were asking careful questions. No one accused Walter openly. Waycross was too polite for that at first. But politeness can destroy a man slowly. It changed the way people paused before greeting him. It changed the way Walter stood in the parking lot, suddenly unsure where to place himself. Naomi watched it happen. She told herself it would be temporary. She told herself she would fix it before it ruined him. But Walter stopped bringing coffee to the outreach office. And when Naomi saw him at church that Sunday, he smiled at her with effort. Not trust. Effort. That hurt her. It should have stopped her. Instead, it taught her how far a person could fall and still keep singing. Evelyn Marsh did not discover the truth all at once. It came to her in pieces small enough to deny. A call from the bank she did not understand. A notice folded into the wrong envelope. Walter Given standing in the chapel parking lot with his hat in both hands, looking older than he had looked the Sunday before. Naomi's voice becoming too gentle whenever Evelyn asked a simple question. For years, Evelyn had believed gentleness was one of Naomi's best parts. Now it began to frighten her. She found the first paper in a kitchen drawer where Naomi had once helped her organize insurance forms and tax notices. Evelyn stood with the drawer open, reading a line that made no sense. Her name was there. Her house was there. Naomi's name was there too, close enough to make Evelyn feel cold. She did not call the police. Not yet. That was not how Evelyn loved people. She called Naomi. Naomi came that evening in the same blue dress she wore for Wednesday service. She brought soup, as if soup could soften numbers on a page. Evelyn watched her set the container on the table and remembered the 14-year-old girl who had once stood in the doorway with a garbage bag of clothes at her feet. For a moment, Evelyn wanted that child back. Then she looked at the paper again. "Sit down, Naomi." Naomi sat. The kitchen was quiet except for the old clock above the stove. It had belonged to Samuel Marsh, and it made the silence worse. Evelyn placed the paper between them. "Tell me what this is." Naomi looked at it, then away. That was the answer before the words came. "I can explain," Naomi said. Evelyn closed her eyes. How many ruined lives had begun with those 3 words? When she opened them, she did not shout. Anger would have been easier than the grief rising in her chest. Then explain it with the truth. Naomi's face changed. Not much. Just enough for Evelyn to see the girl under the woman, the child who still expected love to turn into punishment. When truth entered the room, Evelyn reached across the table, but Naomi pulled her hands into her lap. "I was going to fix it," Naomi whispered. "What did you take?" Naomi shook her head. "What did you let me sign?" Still no answer. Evelyn looked toward the hallway, where old photographs hung in narrow frames. Samuel in front of the house, paint on his sleeves. Their first Christmas there. The pear tree after the storm. A life built slowly, honestly, with small paychecks and careful hands. "You know what this house is," Evelyn said. Naomi began to cry. That might once have moved Evelyn toward comfort. This time, the tears only made the room heavier. Evelyn had forgiven Naomi's tears before. She had mistaken them for a door opening. Now she understood tears could also be a curtain. "Listen to me," Evelyn said. "I love you. I have loved you since you were a child with nowhere safe to sleep. But love is not the same as letting you keep hurting people." Naomi covered her mouth. "There is still a way to tell the truth," Evelyn continued. "We can go to Reverend Hale. We can call someone who understands the legal parts. I will go with you." That was the mercy Naomi had wanted her whole life. Not applause, not pity, not the church calling her proof of grace. Someone willing to walk beside her into the truth. And Naomi could not bear it. Because if Evelyn loved her even now, then Naomi had no final excuse left. She could no longer say everyone had abandoned her. She could no longer say goodness was only performance. She could no longer pretend the only reason she lied was that no one had ever offered her a safe place to be honest. Evelyn had offered it, again and again. Naomi looked at the woman who had given her a room, meals, rides, forgiveness, and a name softer than Clara's shadow. She understood that the next words would decide who she was. For a moment, she almost chose well. Her lips parted. Then fear stepped in front of truth. "If we go now," Naomi said, "they will blame Walter." Evelyn went still. Naomi heard herself continue. "His name is on things. Reverend Hale already has questions. If I say too much too fast, it could make him look worse." It was not a clean lie. It was worse. It was a lie using concern as clothing. Evelyn stared at her. "Are you protecting Walter?" she asked. "Or are you using him to protect yourself?" Naomi flinched as if struck. There was no cruelty in the question. That made it impossible to dodge. Evelyn had found the exact place where Naomi's soul had bent. Naomi stood. "I cannot do this right now. Naomi, I need time." "You have had time." The words hung between them. Naomi looked toward the back bedroom. The room where everything could have gone differently if she had learned the right lesson from Mercy. She thought of the clean towels, the soup, Evelyn's hand over hers. She thought of the first money she had taken and the way Evelyn had forgiven her. Forgiveness had been a door. Naomi had used it as cover. "I am sorry," she said. Evelyn's eyes filled. "No," she answered softly. "You are scared." Sorry would tell the truth. That should have broken the spell. It did not. Naomi left the house with the lies still alive behind her. She told herself she would come back in the morning. She would find a way to protect Evelyn, Walter, and herself at the same time. By morning, the bank had already called again. By the end of the week, Evelyn understood she might lose the house Samuel had painted by hand. That was the point of no return. Not because Naomi had never been wounded, not because she had never been loved, but because love finally stood in front of her without a mask, and Naomi still chose the lie. By the time Naomi Bell returned to the courtroom for sentencing, Waycross Grace Chapel had already changed. People still gathered on Sundays. The choir still stood beneath the same yellow lights. Reverend Hale still opened his Bible and spoke about mercy, truth, and the cost of both. But something in the room no longer lifted the way it used to. No one passed offering plates without thinking of envelopes. No one asked an elderly member to sign a form without pausing too long. Kindness had survived, but it had learned to look over its shoulder. That was one of Naomi's punishments, even before the judge spoke. She had not only damaged accounts and papers, she had changed the way good people reached for one another. Evelyn Marsh sat near the front of the courtroom. She did not look victorious. There was no triumph in her face, no satisfaction sharp enough to be called revenge. The White House on Pecan Street was no longer fully hers in the way it had been before. Even the parts that could be legally repaired had lost something no court could restore. A home is not only wood, paint, and signatures. It is the belief that the people you let through the door will not turn your own mercy against you. Walter Givens sat 2 seats away from her. His name had been cleared, but clearing a name is not the same as returning it untouched. For months, people had spoken carefully around him. Some had apologized. Others had avoided apology because shame made them clumsy. Walter accepted what he could, but he no longer stood in the church parking lot with the same open ease. Martha Ellis came too. She held a tissue in one hand and a small church bulletin in the other, folded until the edges softened. Naomi could barely look at her. Martha had not lost the most money, but she had lost something harder to measure. The comfort of believing that when someone prayed beside her kitchen table, the prayer did not have another purpose hidden underneath it. The judge reviewed the charges in a voice that made everything sound smaller than it had felt. Fraud, forgery, exploitation of elderly persons, misuse of charitable funds. Each word was legal and correct. None of them contained Evelyn's kitchen. None contained Walter's shame. None contained Martha's silence, or the way the chapel stopped singing with its whole chest for a while. Before sentencing, Naomi was allowed to speak. She stood slowly. For years, she had known how to use a room. She knew when to lower her voice, when to tremble, when to let silence make other people lean closer. But this room no longer belonged to her. Her voice could not rearrange what had happened. She looked at Evelyn first. "I am sorry," Naomi said. The words sounded thin. Not because they were false. Maybe by then they were not. But regret had arrived after the damage had already found places to live. Naomi tried again. "I know I cannot give back what I took." That was the first honest sentence many people in the courtroom believed. The judge did not let the moment become a stage. He acknowledged Naomi's childhood, the public shame she had endured, the abandonment, the complicated history that had shaped her fear of truth. But he made clear that pain did not sign those papers. Shame did not move those funds. Clara Bell's sins did not force Naomi to use Walter's trust or Evelyn's love. Naomi Bell had been wounded, and then Naomi Bell had chosen. The sentence was long. Years in state prison. Restitution she would likely never fully repay. A permanent ban from working in any role involving charitable funds, financial assistance, or vulnerable elderly members. The judge said the law could punish her, but it could not return the years of peace she had taken from people who had offered her shelter. Naomi lowered her head. Somewhere behind her, someone cried quietly. Maybe it was Martha. Maybe someone else. By then, crying in that room did not belong to one person. When it was over, Deputies led Naomi away. She did not look like a monster. That was what made the story harder, not easier. She looked like a tired woman in a plain suit, small beneath the lights, carrying a face that still remembered how to appear harmless. But harmless was not the same as innocent. Evelyn left the courtroom with Walter beside her. Reverend Hale held the door. No one said much. There are losses that make language feel disrespectful. Outside, the Georgia air was warm. Cars moved along the street as if the world had not just named a price for everything Naomi had done. Evelyn stood for a moment on the courthouse steps and closed her eyes. She had loved a girl who needed saving. That part was true. But love had not required Evelyn to call betrayal by another name. In the years that followed, people in Waycross still told the story of Naomi Bell. Some began with the trial. Some began with Clara. Some began with the little girl in the white dress, singing so beautifully that grown people cried. But the ones who remembered it best began with the names Naomi had nearly erased beneath her own pain. Evelyn Marsh, Walter Givens, Martha Ellis. The old members who had opened drawers, purses, homes, and hearts because a young woman from their church had asked them to trust her. Naomi's tragedy had begun when a child was forced to wear shame like a halo. But the crime was not the shame. The crime was what she later chose to do with it. Understanding where the darkness began did not mean forgiving what it became.